The show Bridgerton takes place in 1813 England, and it is engagement season. Every mother in high-class society is getting her daughters ready to present them to the queen, and if the queen gives you a favorable rating, then it'll really benefit you to hook up with an eligible guy. If she kind of dismisses you, that's not a great sign. And this show focuses on two families. There's the Bridgertons, who have 7 kids. Their daughters are Hyacinth, Eloise, and Daphne. And Daphne's the one who's going to be presented to the queen. The Bridgerton boys are Anthony, Colin, Benedict, and Gregory. And Anthony is the oldest. He's also the man of the house after his father passed away. So he's going to be the one to give away Daphne when it comes time for her to marry someone. He also decides who she's going to marry. It will not be her mother Violet, who simply is preparing her to meet the queen and the parties that follow. Now, their next-door neighbors and lifelong friends are the Featheringtons. They're led by their mother, Portia, and there's 3 daughters, Penelope, Prudence, and Philippa. And in a bold move, she's throwing out all 3 daughters at once, which is kind of unheard of. You usually kind of wait until one daughter's married off, and then the next one gets presented, and then that gets married off, and so on and so forth. So both families get ready to present their daughters to the queen, and the queen is not impressed at all with the Featherington girls. It doesn't help matters that Prudence actually collapses because her corset is way too tight. But the girl that impresses the queen the most that day is Daphne. The queen actually comes down from her throne and says, "Flawless, my dear." So Daphne is now the number 1 girl in every guy's eye. It doesn't hurt about the fact that she has a high dowry, which, if you're not aware, a dowry is the price that a guy will get once he marries a girl from the girl's family. Yeah, it's a messed up society. Now, word of this has gotten to Lady Whistledown, and Whistledown is like an 1800s version of Perez Hilton. Since there's no internet, she doesn't run a blog, but what she does do is post everything in a pamphlet that she initially started handing out for free to get people hooked, but after 2 weeks, she starts charging. And the pamphlet is all about the season and what's going on in high society, and it's got the whole town kind of abuzz. And in the first pamphlet, she paints the narrative that Daphne was a dark horse, but after the queen gave her nod, she's number 1 in the pecking order. And at first, the Bridgerton girls kind of dismiss this pamphlet, but after they see that it speaks highly of them, they're all invested in it. On the flip side, Portia Featherington isn't a fan of it because they don't even mention her daughters. And she even hypothesizes that it might be Violet Bridgerton, but everyone kind of dismisses that. The fact is, though, nobody knows who Whistledown is, so it's got everybody guessing. And Portia's friend who is there that day has to tell her, Whistledown is correct. Daphne is quite a catch. But she points out that this could be a good thing. The quicker that Daphne gets married off, the more guys and suitors there will be for the Featherington girls. But the Featherington girls are about to be joined by one of their distant cousins. Her name is Marina, and she's from the country. She lives on a farm, and she has nobody to present her. So Lord Featherington nominated Portia. So Portia kind of feels like this is a charity case. And her friend asks her, "Are you sure about this? I mean, presenting 4 girls?" But because Marina is a simple farm girl, Portia doesn't see any competition for her Featherington girls. Although she gets a rude awakening when Marina shows up, and she is gorgeous. That night, though, everybody gets ready for the first party of the season, which is thrown by a woman named Lady Danbury. And this will be the first party that Anthony has to escort Daphne to. It's also the first party since the Whistledown pamphlet came out. So everyone's kind of expecting Daphne to be the belle of the ball. And before the party, he's venting to his mistress Sienna, who is a soprano in the opera, about how he really doesn't want to go to this party because of the mothers and the dads doing deals, and unfortunately, because his dad is dead, he's going to have to be that guy. Sienna tells him how Daphne is fortunate because not every woman has that kind of protection. But he instinctively shoots back, well, not every woman is a lady. Which is pretty insulting to Sienna because she knows that she is a mistress. So he has to walk that statement back pretty quickly. But he heads home and gets ready to the party, and everybody heads to Danbury's, and it's just as Anthony had predicted. The mothers are judging everybody, the dads are trying to make deals, but the party does kind of stop when Anthony walks in with Daphne. All eyes are on her. But as they're walking around and potential suitors are walking up to her, Anthony is just shooing them away, thinking that none of them are good enough for his sister. I mean, to be honest, he's a pretty big cockblock. Now, up in the balcony, Portia Featherington is talking to a few friends, but she's also in the middle of putting down Marina because it's obvious that Marina is more attractive than any of her daughters, and no one's really walking up to any of the Featherington girls. And it becomes obvious to everybody in the room that if you're picking either Marina or one of the Featherington girls, you're picking Marina, and that includes Colin Bridgerton. He likes himself some Marina Thompson. Now, a late arrival to the party is the Duke, Simon Bassett. And this guy is the definition of 18th century swag. I mean, he's draped in velvet. It's like his penis showed up 2 minutes before he did on my TV screen. But he's only in town because his father, who he had a terrible relationship with, recently passed away, and he just wanted to finish up some of his affairs. He's related to Lady Danbury, though, and once she invited him to the party, he couldn't really say no. She wasn't accepting that. So he's forced to show up, and as soon as he does, Portia Featherington throws her daughters at him, but he's not interested in them. he's not really interested in anybody. He doesn't want to marry anyone. He's just looking for a way to be seen and then get the hell out. Now, he's not the only one looking for an escape because Daphne really wants to get away from Antony. She makes up an excuse that she wants to go get lemonade when she's approached by Lord Burbrook. And this guy looks like a rat. For all my Harry Potter fans out there, he looks like Peter Pettigrew's brother. Not attractive at all. And it's someone that Daphne definitely does not want to talk to, but he's kind of chasing her down as she tries to get away, and she bumps into the Duke. So she quickly asks, "Who are you?" So it looks like they know each other and they're having a conversation. But he's kind of insulted about the fact that she doesn't know who he is. He thinks that this is a ploy by one of the other mothers to just get their daughter in the good graces of him. But that's all cleared up when Antony sees Bassett and calls over for him because they're old friends from school. So Antony clears up any confusion. Hey, this is my sister. But now Daphne knows all about the Duke because she figures, okay, well, if you're friends with my brother, then that tells me all I need to know about you. After they're done talking to Simon Bassett, though, Antony suggests that they head out, which is ridiculous because she hasn't even danced with anybody. And Violet brings that up, but Antony points out, let's keep everybody wanting more. All eyes are on her, so this is a great time to leave. And they do. Now, the next day is calling day. It's the first day where guys can come over to the house and show that they're interested in the girls that they met the previous night. And Daphne is expecting a lot of suitors. After all the eyes were on her. But unfortunately, no one really shows up for her. And any guy who does is shown the door pretty quickly by Antony. One guy who gets to stay a little bit longer is Lord Burbrook, who Daphne has no interest in whatsoever. And to the surprise of everybody, the most popular girl ends up being Marina. And you can tell that Portia isn't happy that all these suitors are coming over, not for any of her daughters, but for this farm girl. And word of calling day gets to Whistledown. So the next issue of the pamphlet that she puts out, it's all about how maybe, even though the queen gave her nod, the queen was wrong because everybody had eyes for Marina Thompson. She points out that this is exactly what Portia wanted, the number one girl under her roof, but it's not quite true. Portia did want that, but she wanted it for one of her daughters, not Marina. The pamphlet also reaches Daphne, and she is pissed. She talks to Antony about it, venting to him that Lady Whistledown has declared her basically ineligible, worthy of a simpleton and nobody else. Antony tries to remind her that she's giving a lot of credit to somebody who is hiding behind a pen name. No one knows who this person is. But Daphne doesn't care. She feels like everything that Whistledown has written is true, and it's true because of Antony. The fact is, Antony has scared every available suitor away, and Whistledown is simply reporting it. He points out that he's merely protecting her, but she tells him that he has no idea what it's like to be a woman. Her entire life, she's been raised for this moment. And if she's unable to find a husband, she's basically worthless. The good news for Daphne is the next pamphlet from Whistledown doesn't mention her. It's all about how the Duke is not interested in ever getting married. But now Whistledown has the ire of the Duke. He heads to a boys' club and is talking to Antony about it, pissed off because Whistledown basically just gave a challenge to every mother out there. Tame the untamable man. But Antony can't believe that the Duke isn't planning on taking a wife. But the Duke throws it right back at Antony, saying, what about you? You're the oldest son. You're not married. Where exactly is your wife? Or are you planning on marrying that opera singer that you're running around with? Antony, however, points out that he is in possession of something that the Duke is not. Brothers. So he doesn't have to worry about having kids. He figures his brothers will do it for him. In the next pamphlet from Whistledown, it announces that Colin Bridgerton is going to be awarded the, quote, trophy of Marina Thompson. And jealousy is really getting the better of Portia. She would love to send Marina back to the country where she came from, but she knows that Lord Featherington is never going to allow that. So unfortunately for her, she just has to bite her tongue and deal with it. That night, though, there is another party, and it's actually at the opera, the same opera that Antony's mistress sings at. And Violet escorts Daphne there, where as they're walking in, Lady Danbury calls them over to see the queen again. And when she's reintroduced to Daphne, she says, oh yes, she made an impression. However fleeting it was. Because the queen is no different from everybody else. She's reading Whistledown as well. So when the show starts, Danbury joins Daphne and Violet in their box, and they're kind of venting about Whistledown, how she's put both their families in a bind, writing about Daphne and the Duke. And that's when the two women start to conspire about the fact that they should hook Daphne and the Duke up. So Violet invites the Duke over for dinner, which Danbury accepts on his behalf. And he goes over, and it's the entire Bridgerton family at one table. They're all having a good time. Everybody except for Daphne, who is seated next to the Duke. And he can tell that she's not having a good time. And when he brings it up to her, she basically tells him, oh, I'm not going to sit here and just smile because I'm in your presence. It's not going to happen. And the two start squabbling back and forth about how neither are interested in the other. And Antony can clearly see what his mother was doing. So that night, as he's doing work and his mother comes up to him, he yells at her for trying to set up the Duke with Daphne. During the argument, his father comes up and he says, well, if Dad was alive and he knew anything about the Duke, he wouldn't want to set up his daughter with him. Daphne deserves better. I know you think you're solving this matter, but you're not. They start arguing about whose responsibility Daphne is, and that's when Violet says, okay, let's talk about responsibility. Tonight, when you leave here, are you going to go to your room, or are you going to go to the apartment across town and be with that soprano mistress that you've been seeing? All while you rely on your brothers to do the job that you cannot. You want to talk about responsibility? What the hell do you know about responsibility? I sit with that girl. Do you know what I see? I see a terrified girl who knows what kind of life she's going to have if you continue to get in her way. And the fact is, if your father was still here, Daphne would have already been set up with somebody. Violet then just drops the mic and walks out. And Anthony did exactly as his mother predicted. He headed to that apartment, hooked up with Sienna, but then in the morning he ends it, and he's not that nice about it. And it completely takes Sienna off guard. Now that morning, another pamphlet comes out, and it's all about the downfall of Daphne Bridgerton. But Daphne has to shake it off because they have to head to a party that night. It's a party that the Featherington girls will also be attending, but they'll be doing so without Portia. Portia is staying home because Marina wasn't feeling good. And she was feeling sick because Marina is probably pregnant. She's been at the house for a month. She hasn't had her period. And once Portia finds out, she rips into Marina. She starts telling her how she should be happy because she can send her back to where she came from. And even goes as far as to ask her, do you even know who the father is? But Marina, to her credit, sticks up for herself. Basically telling Portia, you don't know what it's like. You live in an ivory tower. You're sitting here judging me having no idea what I've been through. But Portia ends up slapping her. Now, the Featherington girls have no idea about Marina. They're actually thrilled that Portia didn't come because they're allowed to wear what they want. And for Penelope, it's this pink dress instead of the normal hideous green-yellow stuff that her mother usually makes her wear. So as she's standing around, up walks Colin Bridgerton, and she's kind of got a schoolgirl crush on him. And she's excited until he asks, do you know where Marina is? So she fills him in. Marina's staying home. She's not feeling well. But as the two are talking, this complete see you next Tuesday named Cressida shows up. She pours a drink on Penelope, acting like it was an accident. It clearly wasn't. And she's asking Colin if he wants to dance. But since Colin's a stand-up guy, he says, no, actually, I promised my last dance to Penelope, and escorts her out on the dance floor where the two have a good time. Now, keep in mind, it's 1813. They're short on entertainment. So the big entertainment at this party is they're turning lights on. Makes you real appreciative that we have Netflix and we live in 2021. But right after they flip the switch, that's when Anthony walks up to Daphne, letting her know that he's decided she's going to marry Lord Berbick. He tells her how he has no debt, he seems like he's nice to women and animals, and he's also got a pretty decent shot. But Daphne has zero interest in marrying this guy because he literally looks like a ferret. So she walks away because she just wants to be by herself. But Berbick finds her and even brings up about the fact that they're soon to be man and wife, but she turns to him and says, I will never marry you. And the conversation turns contentious with Berbick telling her she doesn't have any options. And he goes to put his hands on her, but she knocks him out. Now, the Duke, who also went to the party but also wanted to get away, had seen this all go down, and he was actually running in to protect her, but found out, yeah, she can protect herself. And as Berbick is lying on the floor unconscious, the Duke says, you can't marry this guy. But she says, well, if I don't find anyone else to propose, then I'm going to have to. Unlike you, I can't just say I don't want to marry. And he mentions how he's surprised that she no longer has a line of suitors. He knows it's because of Whistledown, and he despises her as much as Daphne does at this point. He feels like Whistledown has done a number on both of them. But that's when the Duke realizes that there might be an answer to their issue. He suggests the two act like they're an item. It'll kill two birds with one stone. It'll get the thirsty mothers off of his back. And for the other guys out there, if they think that Daphne is taken, they're going to want her even more. So they head out to the dance floor together, looking like they're madly in love. It gets everybody's eyes on them, and it works. In the next pamphlet from Whistledown, that's all she writes about. In episode 2, we get some backstory on why the Duke cannot stand his father. Lord Hastings always wanted a son, and he finally got one in Simon. Lady Danbury was even there because she was best friends with Simon's mom. But Lord Hastings was such a jerk that he didn't even care that his wife had died in childbirth. All he cared about was that he had a son. Although he quickly turned on him because the Duke was slow to learn how to speak. And when he did finally speak, he had a stutter. And this caused Lord Hastings great embarrassment to the point where he actually sent the Duke away, trying to hide him to hide the embarrassment. Lady Danbury got word about this and went to go check in on the Duke, feeling like she should do this because she was best friends with the Duke's mom. And the Duke was well aware of why his father didn't want anything to do with him. It was because he had a stutter and couldn't speak. But Lady Danbury vowed to get him to the point where he could speak fluently without a stutter. And she is able to kind of do that around the age of 9 or 10. She brings him back in front of Lord Hastings and says, see, here's your son. He's not dead. And the Duke can speak really, really well until the final couple of sentences he stutters once again. And Lord Hastings is so cold that he tells the Duke, "You are my greatest failure." Little Simon tells him, "I wrote you letters to let you know that I wasn't dead. Did you ever read them?" But Lord Hastings tells him, "Just knowing about the fact that you're going to take over Hastings one day is painful enough. Witnessing it in person, I couldn't bear to do that." So the guy was a complete asshole. But fast forward to when he's on his deathbed, he's completely changed his tune. Simon walks in and he tells him he's so happy that he's going to be taking the Hastings name over. But Simon hasn't forgotten. And right before his father passes away, he gets right next to his ear and tells him, "I will never marry," which means I will never have a son, which means that the Hastings name is going to die with me. Now, fast forward to present day, where Simon Hastings is simply trying to get the mothers off of his back, and he's doing that with Daphne, and they're haggling over how many balls they're going to be seen in public with each other. Daphne wanting 8, the Duke wanting 4, and they finally settle on 6, with the Duke having to send her flowers, the expensive kind, just to make it look like this whole charade is real. Her other big concern is the fact that no one can ever know what happened with Lord Berbrook the previous night. She's not embarrassed about the fact that she punched him. She's more worried about her reputation if it's found out that she was with him alone. And the Duke had no intention of revealing that secret, so it should be okay. After the picnic, everybody goes home, and the Bridgertons are kind of just hanging out when Eloise bursts through the door and says, "How does a woman become pregnant if she's not married?" Because Eloise was on a walk with Penelope when Penelope revealed to Eloise that somebody in their house, she didn't mention Marina, but somebody in her house was pregnant and she wasn't married. And this blew both of their minds. They have no idea how a baby is formed if you're not in a marriage. So Eloise needs to get to the bottom of this science experiment, but that is a conversation that Violet is not ready to have with her. She basically tells her, "Don't bring it up again." But that's when one of the Bridgerton help comes in the room and says that Daphne has some suitors. And Daphne is thrilled about this, but the other Bridgerton family members are a little puzzled because they can't figure out why Daphne even cares about other suitors when she's got a Duke after her. The family still has no idea about her arrangement with Simon, and neither does Lord Berbrook, who arrives at the house along with Antony, and he is pissed off that all of these men have suddenly shown up for the woman that he's planning on marrying. And Antony was completely taken off guard by this as well. He walks into basically a party going on in his house, and Berbrook is sitting there looking like an idiot. Antony tells Berbrook that he has to leave, and Berbrook shoots back, "You gave me your word," and Antony tells him, "And I plan on keeping it. You're the only one that's proposed, you're the only one I've considered. But right now, you have to leave, along with everybody else." And he kicks everybody out of the house, and then turns his attention to Violet. And Antony and Violet start getting in an argument about what he walked into, but Violet gets really annoyed when she finds out that Antony had promised Daphne's hand to Berbrook. Daphne, however, is no longer concerned, saying, "I have so many suitors now, Berbrook doesn't even matter." But Antony points out that's exactly what you have. You have suitors. You don't have proposals. You have one proposal, and it's from Berbrook. Violet, however, points out that Daphne is courting a Duke, and that's something that Antony is complete denial about. But both women point out that the Duke sent her flowers in the morning, the expensive kind. Antony, though, reiterates that the Duke is not a serious suitor he's never going to marry. And that's when Daphne tells him, "Well, I'm not marrying Berbrook." But Antony tells her that the paperwork is going to be drawn up and she will marry Berbrook. Antony storms out and Daphne's pretty upset, but Violet tries to calm her down, saying that as soon as Berbrook sees that the Duke is after her, he's going to have to back off. Antony, though, needs to get some answers, and he heads to have a conversation with the Duke and finds him in a boxing ring. And he yells at him for trying to hook up with his sister, asking, "Did you have any idea she was engaged to be married?" And the Duke says, "No, I had no clue." And he asks, "Has the paperwork been drawn up?" But Antony says, "Well, I assure you it's being drawn up." The two get into an argument about whether Berbrook is even worthy of marrying Daphne. And Antony ends up kind of insulting the Duke, saying that, well, at least he knows where Berbrook has been. He hasn't been in whorehouses or any kind of slum that the Duke has been in the last couple of years. Antony does feel bad about what he just said, but he tells the Duke, "Look, you've been a great friend, but this is my sister. I'm not trying to offend you, but family has to come first." Antony then leaves because he has to get ready for a ball that night. It's a ball that pretty much everybody needs to get ready for, including the Duke. But as the women of the Bridgerton household are getting ready, they get word that the Queen has invited Violet for tea in 2 days. And all of the women are thrilled about this invitation. So they're in a pretty good mood as they head off to the ball, where Antony escorts Daphne in, and the Duke escorts Lady Danbury in. But as soon as the Duke sees Daphne, he doesn't care that her brother is by her side. He asks her to dance. And Antony has no choice but to fall back. The Duke and Daphne start walking around the party together, and she explains how they're going to have to make Berbrook believe that this thing is real, so he backs off. Berbrook has to believe that the Duke is serious about proposing. And Berwick, by the way, is at this party, and he's got eyes on both of them like a hawk. Eventually, though, Antony is able to get the Duke alone and asks him, was I not clear with my message? And Simon tells him, no, you were very clear. You intend for your sister to marry a ferret. But that ferret, i.e. Lord Berwick, is actually right behind him because he has a private conversation, and I use private very loosely, with Antony. It's one of those conversations where he's having the conversation with Antony, but he really wants the Duke to hear it as well. And he reiterates his intention to marry Daphne. All the while, though, the Duke is throwing subtle jabs at Berwick, mainly about the fact that he got knocked out by Daphne the previous night. Antony assures Berwick that he'll, quote, handle the matter, and then he turns to the Duke and says that it's none of his concern. But the Duke tells Antony that Berwick's character isn't exactly squeaky clean and points out his black eye, telling Antony that he tried something in the previous night with Daphne, but she clocked him. And Antony just turns to Berwick and tells him, you will never speak to my sister again. Now, Daphne was in the other room, but she could tell a commotion was going on. So she walks in as Antony is walking out and asks, what happened? And Antony says, you don't have to worry about Berwick. He's not a problem anymore. And you would think that Daphne would be thrilled, but she's not. She walks up to the Duke knowing that he had a hand in this and yells at him for interfering, which is confusing the Duke because she wanted Berwick gone and he just did that. After the party, a very confused Duke is walking home, but he's being followed by Berwick. And Berwick pleads the Duke to back off. He says, you don't need her. You're a Duke. I do, though. But Simon is just trying to walk away, and that's when Berwick just needles him a little too much. He brings up the fact that maybe the Duke wants her because he already had her. And that's when Simon turns to Berwick and basically tells him, back off. It's a subtle threat, but Berwick doesn't get the message. He apologizes for what he did the previous night, but tells Simon, you should know all about men who have a lack of judgment. I've heard about your father and what he did once he found out your mother wasn't able to give him the son he always wanted. And that's one line crossed too many for Berwick, and Simon beats the ever-loving crap out of him. The next day, though, Lady Whistledown puts out yet another pamphlet because the word of the engagement to Berwick has gotten out after the little show that the Duke, Antony, and Berwick put on at the party. And this has Daphne really stressed out because the message in the pamphlet is, why would Daphne want Berwick when she has a Duke after her? She has to try to get over in a hurry because she has a picnic to attend to, and at the picnic, Antony comes up and apologizes, having no idea about what happened with Berwick, but she says, you wouldn't have believed me anyway. You only believed that story when a guy told you about it. You didn't care when I told you that I didn't want to marry Berwick. That wasn't good enough for you, was it? She then gets up and walks away because the Duke has shown up. But as the two are walking around, they see Lord Berwick and his messed up face coming in hot with a piece of paper. And he walks up to Antony and Violet and the rest of the Bridgerton gang and threatens them. That piece of paper in his hand is a marriage license. And he tells them that he is to marry Daphne. They are to sign off on it. And if they don't, he's going to tell everybody that Daphne was alone with him on the dark walk. And that won't just mess up Daphne's reputation, that'll mess up the entire Bridgerton reputation. And none of the Bridgertons believe that anything happened between Daphne and Berwick. So this leaves Antony so pissed off that he wants to challenge Berwick to a duel, which is pretty illegal. And Violet tells him, you're not doing that. And Daphne agrees with her mother, saying there's no point of doing that. I mean, what happens if Berwick speaks before you're able to shoot him? Words out. He can speak at any moment. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to marry Berwick. And when she gets home, she's depressed and sad. And her mother comes to try to comfort her, telling her that marriage isn't all about the partner. Yes, that's a big part of it, but it's also about the family you have and the house you keep. And all of those things can bring you a lot of joy. But that doesn't really help Daphne because she saw the relationship that her parents had and the love that they had for each other, and she wants that. And marrying Berwick guarantees that that will never be the case. The two go off to bed, and the next day is a huge day for Violet. She's going to tea with the Queen. And when she arrives, the Queen is banging lines of cocaine in between reading the latest Lady Whistledown pamphlet. But shortly after Violet arrives, the Queen calls over one of her servants to get her some more cocaine. And when he leaves the room, the Queen tells her that that guy is a huge gossip. If they were to speak freely, it would be all over England by the next day. They then start subtly discussing Daphne's situation with Berwick, because the Queen wants Daphne to marry a Duke. The Queen basically gave Daphne her stamp of approval, and she knows that it would also be a really bad look for the Queen if Daphne marries Berwick instead of a Duke. It's a huge ego trip, but there's a method behind the Queen's madness of inviting her there that day. Because when that guy gets back, Violet notices that he's kind of making a face to the woman that Violet brought. And that's what Violet realizes, that she has to invite Berwick's mom over. So she does that. And Berwick's mom is really delusional and pretty rude to Daphne. But she didn't invite Berwick's mom over to actually have pleasantries with her. She invited her over so that the Bridgerton help could get dirt on Berwick from Berwick's help. And as soon as Berwick's mom leaves, she gets the lowdown from the staff that Lord Berwick had an illegitimate child with one of the help and sent not only the female away, but also the child away, who he's ignored, never paid child support for, and if this word got out, it would be a terrible look. So Violet knows she needs to get that secret out ASAP. Now, they all know that no one's going to believe a woman with this story, but there is one woman who everybody will believe, and it's Lady Whistledown. So they need to have this rumor spread so much that it gets to the ears of Lady Whistledown. And they do that. They start spreading it through all the help, and when the next pamphlet comes out, Lady Whistledown writes about Lord Berwick's illegitimate child. And that should take care of the Berwick situation. Because that night, as Violet is kind of soaking in her glory, Antony walks in, letting her know that Berwick has left town. But he also knows that this isn't a coincidence. He tells his mother, "I'll make sure this never happens again." But Violet basically fires him, saying that while society dictates that you be the man of the house and you be in charge, I am fully capable of dealing with Daphne and her future husband. So unfortunately for Antony, he gets let go, which is a good thing because he's been doing a terrible job. Now, the next day, Daphne is thrilled about this news. She's getting ready for a party when Eloise walks in. And Eloise has been kind of conflicted watching her older sister go through this pomp and circumstance. Because Eloise wants more for her life. She wants to go to university, even though women aren't allowed to. She hates the fact that this proposal season is supposed to be the highlight of a woman's life. And while it seems like it's enough for her sister, she definitely wants more. Her sister, though, just wants to find a husband. And when she goes to the ball that night, she's escorted in by the Duke, and they start having a conversation about how to make this charade more believable, which is a trend with them. But the latest idea that Daphne has is that they have to start calling each other by their real name. During this dance, though, they get dangerously close to kissing. I mean, real close. But once the song ends, Daphne gets asked to dance by somebody else, and the Duke falls back. And as he's standing there, Lady Danbury comes up and she can tell that something's wrong with the Duke. And while he denies it, it seems like the Duke is starting to have feelings for Daphne Bridgerton. Now, one person who's been noticeably absent from these parties and these picnics is Marina. And the Featherington girls have found out the reason why she's not going to these parties, the fact that she's pregnant. But Penelope wanted some more information about how somebody has a child out of wedlock, the horror. So she brings Marina some food and asks how it happened. And Marina explains that she fell for a guy at church. They started talking led to food led to something, and he's all fighting a war, but they've stayed in contact through letters. And she's in love with him. So she tells Penelope that the baby was made out of love, which doesn't exactly answer Penelope's question about where babies come from. It's adorable how ignorant she is. But Marina has basically been sequestered. And as she's writing the baby's father a letter, one of the Featherington help comes in to give her food, and she says, "Are you planning on keeping me here the whole time?" But the help basically tells her that you have no one to blame but yourself. In episode 3, things are going great for Daphne. She's getting proposed to left and right. She's also shooting them down. And word of this has gotten to Lady Whistledown, who writes about it in her latest pamphlet. Whistledown hypothesizes that Daphne isn't interested in anybody else. She's just waiting for the Duke to take the plunge and ask her to marry him. They, however, go out for ice cream and are just kind of reveling in the fact that they've fooled everybody. The ruse is working. When she gets home from this ice cream extravaganza, her mom asks her, "Have you thought about who you want to dance with tonight?" And she starts giving out a couple of names, all of them being lords. And her mom says, "Well, what about the Duke?" But Daphne reminds her mom that the Duke hasn't proposed yet. Her mom tells her that marriage isn't exactly rocket science. You just marry the guy that seems to be your best friend. And while Daphne thinks that's ridiculous, her mom tells her, no, it's that simple. But Daphne isn't the only one who's getting ready for the ball that night. Marina is going to be making her first appearance since she became, quote, sick. Portia wants her out and married ASAP. Because in Portia's mind, she's selling off damaged goods. If she gives Marina away quickly, then when Marina has the baby, whoever marries her is going to think it's his. Penelope, though, wants things to work with Marina and the baby's father, George, who is on the front lines fighting in Spain. They keep waiting for George to write them back, and Marina's getting frustrated that she hasn't received a letter, with Penelope reminding her, he's on the front lines, it might take a little bit for you to get word. But Portia rules that household, so Marina's going to the ball, although when she shows up, she is very, very rude to the first guy that Portia introduces her to, setting the tone that she's not going to follow Portia's rules just because Portia wants her to. Daphne and the Duke, though, head into the ball, and immediately she is met by a lord who asks her to dance. And the Duke plays it off perfectly, acting like he's so jealous. But Daphne dances with a few of the guys there, and none of them really do anything for her. And while Daphne is dancing with the other guys, Violet is reminding Lady Danbury that she has to get on the Duke to actually pull the trigger and propose. There is, however, a new player in town. He's a prince from Prussia, and girls are falling over themselves to get to this guy. The first one to actually approach him is Cressida, and from a distance, Daphne and the Duke are making fun of her the entire time, predicting her every move as it happens. The prince, however, is brought over by the queen to meet Daphne, with the queen introducing Daphne as the season's diamond. But when the prince says something that Daphne and the Duke had joked that he would, Daphne cracks up, embarrassing the queen completely. Doesn't really matter, though, because the prince is smitten. At this ball, eventually most of the guys get together and start gambling, and that includes the Duke and Antony. And it seems like the bad blood between Antony and the Duke is gone. The Duke tries to bring it up to him, with Antony telling him, well, you can't be mad at me for questioning your intentions, but the Duke says, no, I can. Yeah, I've done some stupid things in my life, but you know me better than anybody. You know I wouldn't make a fool of your sister. As the two are discussing the Duke's intentions, in walks a bunch of other females, including Sienna. These are basically all of the side chicks. And Antony doesn't really want to run into Sienna, but he does notice that she walks right up to the Duke and starts flirting with him heavily, inviting him to one of her concerts. Although, to the Duke's credit, he never shows up. That night, though, after the party, both Antony and Daphne can't really sleep, and they meet up in the kitchen, where Daphne asks Antony, why won't the Duke marry? Antony doesn't give her the full story, but basically tells her that he never knew his mom and he barely knew his dad. He grew up a lot different than them. In the 20 years that Antony has known him, he's never really mentioned a family, and that's because the Duke likes to be alone. The next day, a new Lady Whistledown pamphlet comes out, highlighting that Prince Frederick from Prussia is in town looking for a wife. And Prince Frederick, along with everybody else, is going to be at this new art exhibit that's opening. And by everybody else, that includes the Bridgerton family. When they show up, Violet starts pointing out all of the single females for Antony, but he's just not interested. It doesn't take long, though, for Daphne to attract the prince. But Daphne doesn't seem really interested in him, and that's something that he seems to like. The art of the chase. She, however, prefers to leave the prince and go into another room where the Duke is admiring all the art that he and his family had donated to it. This whole room is nothing but his father's artwork. And as the two are staring at one particular painting, which the Duke tells Daphne was his mother's, Daphne starts giving her interpretation of it, and their hands start getting close and close until eventually they're actually holding hands. Although they realize what they're doing and they pull away. They go outside where there's a commotion going on, and that's because Cressida had swooned and fainted and was saved by the prince. And look, there were no Oscars back then, but if there were, Cressida wouldn't have gotten one of those. She would have gotten a Razzie because it's horrible acting. The next day, news of this has gotten a Lady Whistledown, and she writes about it in her latest pamphlet, highlighting the fact that Cressida has seemingly gotten most of the attention from the prince. But while most people are obsessed with him, one person who is noticeably not is Daphne Bridgerton. And news of this does not sit well with the queen, who basically instructs the prince to go court Daphne because she is the diamond of the year. The prince, however, is under the assumption it's a waste of time because Daphne seems to be really into the Duke, and he respects that, but the queen does not. This, however, is kind of a down day for everybody in this society. There's no balls going on. So Daphne decides to spend her day working on a piano tune that she's creating, but this leads to a fight with Eloise, because Eloise still does not understand Daphne, and Daphne doesn't really understand Eloise. Portia Featherington, however, wanted Marina to see how the other side lives. She brings her to the slums, showing her that if she doesn't follow order, this is what she'll become, and more importantly, what her child might have to deal with. Marina tells her, I have a man who loves me, and Portia says, all right, well then where is he? And Marina tells Portia that he's fighting on the front lines for his country. She also tells her that she's written to him many times love letters, but Portia asks, well, has he written back ever since informing him that he's going to be a dad? And the answer to that is no. Portia tells her that a lot of guys will say things to get in your pants, but when it comes time to actually take care of a child, things kind of change. Shout out to all the single moms out there. She then takes Marina home, but Portia knows that she needs to really get through to her. So she, along with one of the help, forge a letter from George in Spain, sending it to Marina, where George breaks up with Marina, telling her that he wants nothing to do with her whatsoever. It really breaks Marina's heart. And the most unfortunate thing is the fact that she has no idea that it's all a lie. And Portia did this because she's so convinced that this guy is never going to show up for Marina after learning that she's pregnant. She feels like this will be the best way to get Marina to buy into the season. Daphne and the Duke, however, meet up at a park and they start talking about marriage. But the more they talk about it, the more the Duke realizes that Daphne doesn't know anything. And it's not her fault, she just hasn't been told by her mother. The Duke doesn't want to exactly be the person to tell her about the birds and the bees, but Daphne begs him and eventually he gives in. And he tells her about what happens between a man and a wife, but he also tells her about, alone time with yourself and your hand, aka all of high school, college, and my adulthood. And this blows Daphne's mind. She had no idea that you could take your hand and go down there and feel around a little bit, and eventually you feel real good. So with that planted in her head, she knows what she'll be doing that night. The Duke, however, is picked up by Lady Danbury, who chastises him for dragging his feet with the proposal. Danbury tells the Duke that it's obvious to everybody with two eyes that Prince Frederick is into Daphne. So if the Duke is truly into Daphne, that's fine, go along with it. But if this is nothing more than just a fling, then the Duke should cut her loose. And she also tells him that if he doesn't, she'll never forgive him. But while Daphne has caught the eye of Prince Frederick, when Daphne gets some one-on-one time with her body that night, it's not Prince Frederick that she thinks about, it's the Duke. And as she's upstairs having her first orgasm, outside, her brother and sister are discussing the sexist society that they currently live in. The next day, when Daphne meets up with the Duke for ice cream, she's in a real good mood, but the Duke is not. The Duke, heeding the advice of Lady Danbury, breaks things off with Daphne, telling her that their mission is accomplished. Daphne has plenty of suitors, and the mothers are currently off the Duke. Daphne, though, can't figure out why he's doing this. She feels like she did something wrong. And the Duke, a lot like his best friend Antony, does not let her down easy, but instead is really rude about it, telling her that they were never friends. She was nothing more than a means to an end. And it upsets her so much that she runs home crying. It upsets him so much that he had to do it, that he wants to get the hell out of England ASAP, telling those that work for him to expedite the process of finalizing his father's affairs. The next day, Daphne has to head to a seamstress to get a gown. And at the same seamstress is Cressida and her mother. And Cressida's mother walks up to Violet and kind of thanks her for backing off of the prince, because with Daphne out of the way, that leaves Cressida to become a princess. And it's pretty awkward because Cressida's mom admits that while Cressida has the money, Daphne has that face. But the whole conversation can be heard by Daphne. And with just being recently broken up, sort of, Daphne now has revenge in her mind. So she tells the help to prepare that bad bitch gown. That one that's going to get everybody's attention at the ball that night. Now, Violet goes to check in on Antony to see if he's going to the ball. And in fact, he is. So she hands him a list of potential females that he should be looking at. But he's not interested in any of them. In fact, after seeing Sienna, he went back to the opera to try to apologize and win her back, but she told him no, completely rebuffing his advances. So he's really not in the best mood. But Violet is completely unaware of this. What she is aware of is the fact that Antony doesn't have a lot of time. Now, another female who's looking to be on the revenge tour is Marina, who thinks that her baby's father had just up and dumped her. So when she arrives at the ball that day, she's willing to dance with just about anybody. The Duke has also arrived at the ball, but he alerts Lady Danbury that he's going to be leaving England immediately. And because of this, Danbury calls him a fool. And he looks even more foolish when Daphne shows up, because the gown, the ball, everything works. The entire party stops for her. And when she makes it downstairs, the prince leaves Cressida's side and tells Daphne, "I must be your first dance." And she accepts. And as the two are dancing, the Duke can't watch anymore. He just leaves. And in the next Whistledown pamphlet, she wonders if this was simply Daphne sick of waiting for a proposal from the Duke, or Daphne leveling up, because a prince is better than a duke. In episode 4, at the next high society event, Daphne and her mother meet up with the queen and the prince at this big party. And at the party, the prince gives Daphne a necklace, but as he's putting it on her, all she can think about is the Duke putting it on her. It's obvious, though, to everybody watching that the two are smitten. And in the next pamphlet, Lady Whistledown writes about the leveling up that Daphne has done. It's kind of unheard of to go from possibly marrying a duke to now possibly marrying a prince. And everybody is waiting for the prince to propose to Daphne, including her own family, which is stressing Daphne out. Because while she likes the prince, she wants the Duke. Now, some people that weren't at this party to see Daphne get the necklace were the Featheringtons. Portia had invited a lord over to meet with Marina, and this guy is decrepit and old and disgusting. And as soon as he leaves, Marina turns to Portia and says, "You can't possibly expect me to marry that guy. I mean, this is ridiculous. I have suitors now." And Portia says, "Yes, you have suitors. They're just that. They could take months to court you. This old guy, he just wants an heir. He's not going to ask any questions once your little bun comes out of the oven." And this cold realization pisses off Marina so much that she just gets up and leaves. Shortly after she leaves, though, a possible suitor comes courting, but he doesn't come for Marina, he comes for Philippa. And this is the first guy to come calling for one of the Featherington daughters, which has Portia over the moon. But the guy wasn't there with Penelope, so she leaves for the day. meeting up with Eloise. Eloise also didn't want to be in her house because she's sick of the whole Daphne circus. She tells Penelope that she hopes that Daphne stays on the shelf forever because once Daphne gets married off, she's next in line and she has bigger aspirations. She doesn't want her whole life to be marriage. She's envious of a person like Lady Whistledown, a woman who's in power, taking all of the town's money and doing it her own way. And that's when she realizes that she has to find out who this woman is. And that's not really Penelope's thing, but she does wish Eloise luck in finding out the true identity of Lady Whistledown. Now, most of the town that day is going to a boxing match that's going to be featuring Will, the Duke's boxing partner. And the Duke was planning on leaving that day, but Will begged him to stay, because everybody knows that Will and the Duke are close. And if the Duke was absent from this match, then nobody was going to bet on Will. So he needed the Duke there to kind of convince the betting public that Will was the one to bet on. Another person that's going to that fight is Daphne. She was escorted there by Antony. And at the fight, she meets up with the prince, who's a little surprised to see her there. He did ask Antony to bring her, but he never actually expected her to show up because it's just not the sort of thing that girls are usually into. But he's pleasantly surprised. He figured that this would be a good opportunity to get to know each other a little bit more. And Daphne's all for hanging out with the prince, but she does get distracted when she sees the Duke. The Duke, by the way, also gets distracted when he sees Daphne. But Daphne realized that she needs to get her head away from the Duke and back on the prince, so they start having a conversation about how important family is to one another. And the prince seems like a really good guy in the sense that he's interested in what Daphne wants for her life, where Daphne wants to live, what kind of family Daphne wants. And it's worth mentioning that during this conversation, the fight is going on, and the Duke is acting as the corner man for Will, but he kind of gets distracted when he sees Daphne and the prince chatting it up. And this conversation went so well between Daphne and the prince that she ends up standing up and cheering for the guy that Will is fighting because he happens to be a friend of the prince, although it doesn't go his way. It's rocky at first for Will, but he ends up knocking the guy out, and he was a big underdog. So there were a couple of angry bettors in the crowd that day, one of them being Lord Featherington. And a bunch of people that did bet on Will come to Featherington looking for their money, and he assures them that he has it, but he needs 2 days to get his affairs in order. Also at the fight that day was Benedict Bridgerton, and he sees a local artist named Henry Granville, and the first encounter between these two was a little awkward because Benedict was crapping all over Granville's art, unaware of the fact that Granville was standing right next to him, although Granville takes it in stride. He actually found the encounter pretty funny, and invites a very embarrassed Benedict to come to his house later that night and see the other side of his artwork, the less dreary and drab side. And since Benedict is an aspiring artist, he accepts. And then finally, over in the corner is Antony, who is apologizing to the Duke. He tells him that at this point, it's clear that his intentions with Daphne were in fact honorable, and he's sorry he ever felt otherwise. But as the two are having a conversation, the prince ends up walking up to Antony and asking if he could ask Daphne to marry him. Antony, though, doesn't want to give him an answer. He wants to talk to Daphne about it. So he runs home and gives her the good news, although Daphne doesn't really have an answer. She's at a loss for words. And Violet lets her know that she doesn't have to decide right now because of the fact that they don't really know each other yet. And it's a good point. So Antony tells her, hey, when you have an answer, let me know, and I'll forward it on to the prince. The fact, though, that she was really hesitant to jump at this has Violet thinking. And that night, as Daphne is getting ready for yet another ball, Violet approaches her and asks what exactly happened with the Duke. And that's when Daphne finally admits that everything her mom saw was a lie. This completely takes Violet off guard, and Daphne tells her, you should be happy. I mean, our plan worked. I've got the eye of a prince. But that's not what Violet wanted at all, telling her daughter, what I wanted was for you to be happy, not your social class to improve. And it's clear that what I saw with the Duke and you, but Daphne cuts her off screaming, what you saw wasn't real. But this is more Daphne trying to convince herself than convince her mother. Violet, though, wasn't the only one that was wondering what the hell happened with Daphne and the Duke. Lady Danbury was wondering the same thing. And as the Duke's things are being packed up, Danbury has a conversation with him, where she yells at him for letting Daphne slip through his fingers. She says, I know you don't believe in love, but look how much it's done for our culture. The queen is black, and when the king fell in love with her and married her, it opened all doors, because until that moment, it was two separate societies, white and black. But once the unity was formed, it's like a whole different world was opened up. And that is because love conquers all. But even after this impassioned speech, the Duke doesn't believe any of it, saying that love changes nothing. The Duke, though, has a boat to get ready to catch, and Danbury has that ball, where basically the entire town is there. Marina has that creepy old guy on her. Philippa is dancing with her suitor. Daphne, though, is waiting for the prince, and as she's waiting for him to arrive, Cressida walks up and confronts her about the fact that she stole the prince from her, saying, you could have had any guy you wanted, why did you have to take the guy that was into me? But Daphne tells her, tough cookies, he chose me, I don't know what to tell you, and then walks up to the prince who had just arrived, and the two start dancing. And the party seems to be going well for everybody except Philippa, who runs up to her mother crying because her suitor won't even look at her anymore. Lord Featherington had said something to him to scare him off. And this mortifies Portia, who walks up to Lord Featherington demanding to know what the hell he said. Because, in her eyes, that suitor was perfectly fine for Philippa. Combining this with the fact that she doesn't have any other suitors, but Lord Featherington tells her that he's fine if none of them marry this year. They all wait. And then he just walks off. The party is also not going great for Marina, who is still dancing with a corpse. And she's rescued by Colin Bridgerton, who couldn't believe that she actually wanted to dance with that guy. He walked up to Penelope to confirm the fact that she wasn't actually into him, and when Penelope said, no, she actually needs to be saved, Colin Bridgerton came to the rescue and saved her. And Marina has a lot more fun dancing with Colin than she did with an 85-year-old. Daphne and the prince, though, continue to dance the night away, but he gets that important moment where he's going to propose to her, and she gets so freaked out that she excuses herself, running outside to get some air, and also ripping off the necklace that he gave her. And that's when she hears somebody call her name from behind her, and it's the Duke. The Duke was planning on leaving that night, but he stopped by to say goodbye to her. And she tells him there's no need, we're not friends, remember? And he apologizes for all of that, but she doesn't want to hear it. She starts telling him how good she's doing because Prince Friedrich is ready to propose to her. And she starts going through all the reasons why Prince Friedrich is great for her. But the Duke isn't buying anything that she's selling. She's getting more and more animated, though, saying how great her life's going to be, but it seems like she's convincing herself more than she's convincing the Duke. And she gets really upset with the fact that the Duke isn't responding to any of this. So she just starts to walk away, and the Duke chases after her. But she's unknowingly running into the dark walk. Eventually, the Duke catches up with her, spins her around, and then he kisses her. And the two start heavily making out with some sweet second base action over the shirt. But then they're caught by Antony, who has the bold strategy of throwing the Duke down, punching him in the face, and then demanding that the Duke marry Daphne. He tells the Duke, you just took her innocence. Let's pray to God that nobody saw this, but you now have to marry her. The Duke, however, sticks to his pledge to not wed, apologizing to Daphne, but saying, I'm sorry, I can't. And Antony can't believe that he, quote-unquote, took her innocence, and now he won't even do the honorable thing and marry her, that he demands to have a duel with the Duke at dawn. And it's not just Antony who's insulted at this point. Daphne's pretty insulted, too. The way she views it, the Duke would rather die than marry her. And all the Duke can say for himself is, I'm sorry. So Antony escorts Daphne back into the party where it's clear something had happened. And Cressida walks up to her and says, Daphne, you look unwell. Did you catch a chill in the garden? Kind of hinting to Daphne that she might have seen what went down. Antony, though, comes to the rescue and escorts her home for the night. And when the two get home, they have an argument about Antony's true intentions with this whole duel situation because Daphne takes a lot of responsibility for what happened in the garden. She reminds him that dueling is very illegal, and Antony says, I don't take this lightly, but this is the way gentlemen handle things like this. It's not just your honor at stake. If any of this were to get out, it's our family name. And Daphne is struggling with the fact that her brother could die or the Duke could die, and it's all because of her. The conversation, though, is interrupted when Benedict gets home from a night at Granville's house with a lot of like-minded individuals. It was the first time that Benedict was able to kind of let his hair down and just be an artist for once. So he's in a pretty good mood until he interrupts the conversation, and Antony pulls him in another room and explains what's going on. And this has a pretty big effect on Benedict because he's next in line. So if Antony dies, Benedict is now the man of the house. And if Antony survives, well, dueling's pretty illegal, so Antony's going to have to flee the country. So Benedict is going to have to take over the family affairs. They also fill Colin Bridgerton on what's going on as well when he arrives home. Knowing, though, that this is going to be the last night in his house, Antony goes to visit Sienna. And at first, Sienna does not want to talk to him at all, but he explains the situation and tells her that if he survives, he's going to have to flee the country, and he wants her to come with him. And she likes that offer so much that the two end up having sex. It's pretty great. So it was a pretty busy night at the Bridgerton household. It was also a pretty busy night at the Featherington household as well. Lord Featherington scaring off a perfectly good guy for his daughter has really piqued the interest of Portia. So much so that she goes into his office looking for the reason why, and she finds it. And when Featherington arrives home that day, she confronts him with his ledgers. She's found all of his debts, all of his gambling history, everybody that he owes money to, including Marina's father, which explains why he's so hesitant to return Marina back where she came from. And the reason why he scared this guy off is because he also gambled away the dowries. So he can't pay this guy to take his daughter. And Portia demands to know how he plans on fixing it, but all he can do is break down, crying in her shoulders, saying how much he failed the family. It's not all tears, however, in the Featherington household, because in the other room, Marina is over the moon in love with Colin. And she's telling Penelope this, unaware that Penelope is also pretty in love with the guy. She's convinced that Colin is going to propose very soon. And Penelope is doing her best to hide her emotions, but she just doesn't want to hear it. And Marina isn't really picking up on that. Marina does eventually leave thinking that Penelope's going to go to bed, but Penelope notices somebody outside, and that's Eloise. So she goes down to see what she wants, and Eloise is blabbering on about her theories on who Whistledown could be. She thought it would be a houseworker, but she found out the hard way that, that's not true. So she now figures that Whistledown has to be a high society widow because of the fact that she's invited to all these parties, but she's not important enough to be noticed. And this conversation is stressing Penelope out so much that she loses it on Eloise, yelling, "I don't care. Some people have real problems. And I don't expect you to understand because not everybody can be a pretty Bridgerton girl." And Eloise is so aghast that she just walks off. So it was a pretty tense night for a lot of people. The next morning, though, is the duel, and Daphne could not sleep. She goes to Colin demanding to know where this duel is taking place because she wants to stop it from happening. And Colin is reluctant to tell her. He also figures that the duel won't actually take place, that both guys will realize the whole thing is stupid and they'll fire off their pistols into the sky. Daphne, though, disagrees, telling Colin that Antony is too angry to fire wide and the Duke is too stubborn. So Colin gives her the location and she races off to try and stop it before it starts. Antony and Benedict have arrived, however, and so has the Duke and Will. And right before they're to grab their pistols, Antony tells Benedict that if things don't go his way, there's a name of a woman in the top drawer of his desk, and she is to be taken care of. And that woman, of course, is Sienna. The two men, though, they grab their pistols, they take their paces, and then they turn around and point. And Antony has got his pistol pointed right at the Duke. He's planning on firing it. But the Duke has his pistol pointed in the sky. He has no plans on killing his friend. And right as Antony fires his gun, Daphne arrives, but when the gun goes off, the horse that she's on throws her back, and immediately both men go to tend to Daphne to make sure she's okay. And she's okay, but she's pissed off that it actually came to this. She demands to talk to the Duke privately. And she explains to the Duke that Cressida had seen the two in the garden, and Cressida is going to talk. And once she does, this will ruin Daphne's reputation. So if the Duke doesn't marry her, her life is basically ruined. The Duke, however, reiterates that he cannot marry her, and she is floored that after explaining the situation, he still won't marry her. And that's when the Duke explains that if they were ever to wed, he could not give her a child. He knows that all she wants is to have a family and to have a household and to have the love that she grew up with. And by marrying her, he would be asking her to sacrifice all of that. And he doesn't want to make her give up her dream. She, however, thinks about it for a couple seconds and then proclaims to everybody that her and the Duke are to be wed. And in episode 5, we're getting ready for a wedding. Now, Violet's feeling under the weather, aka she's got a hangover, but she suddenly feels a lot better when Daphne comes in and lets her know that she's engaged, and she's engaged to the Duke. She's a little surprised, however, that it wasn't the prince, because all roads pointed to Prince Friedrich. She's even more surprised because it doesn't seem like Daphne's all that excited about this. But Daphne says, "No, I'm excited, I just haven't had a moment to really take it all in." She does tell her mother she doesn't feel like waiting a month to get married and says, "Isn't there a way that we can get a license quicker than that?" But she also realizes asking that is kind of fishy. So she tells her mom, "I don't want to lie to you, me and the Duke," but Violet cuts her off, saying, "You don't have to tell me what happened between you and the Duke. Even though society makes a big fuss about things, it's tough to keep your emotions in check when you want somebody." So they will attempt to get a marriage license quicker than what's normally expected. And with not a lot of time, they have to go into wedding mode ASAP. Because they don't want this thing to look like a kid's birthday party at a roller rink. Crappy pizza, store-bought cake. They want it to look legit. But in the next pamphlet, word of the engagement comes out, and Lady Whistledown writes about it, which catches everybody, including the Queen and Friedrich, by complete surprise. Whistledown speculates that the only reason you'd want a marriage license quicker than a month is if you're truly madly in love or you're hiding something. Friedrich, on the other hand, wants to get some kind of clarity. So he heads over to meet with Daphne, and she apologizes for everything that's gone on, telling him that while she likes him and he's an incredible guy, she's just in love with the Duke. There was really nothing that Friedrich could have done. And to his credit, Friedrich just accepts this, wishing her and the Duke nothing but the best. She then heads to the park where, along with Violet and Lady Danbury, they meet up with the Duke. And the Duke is hung over. Daphne and the Duke walk off alone together, and Daphne's trying to make conversation, but the Duke isn't really giving anything back. It's pretty awkward. Now, while his sister and his friend/duel mate were having awkward walks in the park, Antony went to go visit Serena, only to find out that she's not there. The seamstress, who's Serena's friend, lets him know that she skipped town. And Antony headed over there to make good on his promise that he would take care of her, but the seamstress tells him, this could come as a surprise. She doesn't need your money. Anthony Bridgerton is not the only Bridgerton that the seamstress is going to see that day because there's a dress fitting for Daphne. But as they're talking about what she'll wear on her wedding night, in walks Cressida. She gets Cressida alone to try to find out how much information Cressida did know. And Cressida does kind of poke at Daphne taking a midnight stroll in the garden. And at first, Daphne says, there's no way you could have seen anything from the balcony. Either that or you were also in the midnight garden. But when Cressida tells her that her view was perfectly fine from the balcony, she just played around with the prince to rile up the Duke, then lure him in the gardens to trick him into marrying her. That's like a final straw for Daphne. She tells Cressida, you should be more careful with your words because in a couple days I'm going to be a duchess and you'll just be the same old person. Unmarried, untitled. So you can either be a duchess's friend or an enemy. It's up to you. Cressida, though, doesn't back down, saying that she doubts that Daphne will even get him down the aisle in the first place because she imagines a guy like the Duke doesn't appreciate being tricked into marriage. Now, while Daphne was dress shopping, the Duke and Antony headed to the church to get the approval for the marriage license. The Duke tells Antony he has no interest whatsoever in the dowry. He's not taking it. He's planning on marrying Daphne because it's the right thing to do. They also have a conversation about the whole, hey, I tried to kill you yesterday thing, saying, we'll probably laugh about this later. But there's no laughing when the priest comes in and denies their request for a marriage license, and it all has to do with the queen. The queen does not like the fact that her nephew, the prince, is heading home to Prussia without the diamond of the season. She's even more upset because Friedrich doesn't even plan on fighting for Daphne. So the queen intervened, telling the priest not to accept the marriage license. So Antony and the Duke head over to let Danbury, Violet, and Daphne know that their request was denied. And Danbury knows exactly what happened. She can put the pieces together. And she points out that if this really pissed off the queen, it doesn't only bode well for Daphne's social future, it doesn't bode well for any Bridgerton social future. But there is a way to possibly smooth things over. Danbury says that they should appear in front of the queen and plead their case, telling the queen that they're in love. Don't put it on thick because she'll realize what's going on, but do it just enough to make it believable. So the Duke and Daphne know what they'll be doing the next day. That night, however, Benedict Bridgerton goes back to Granville's place for a party. Or I should say it's more like an orgy. He starts off hooking up with the seamstress, which is a good choice because she's a dime. The seamstress leads him over to have a threesome with another chick. But as they were trying to find a room, they did open a door to find Granville hooking up with a dude. I mean, all bets were off at this party. Now, the Duke had himself quite a night. He went on yet another bender, only to be saved by Will, who brought him back to his place to sober up. And it was even an active night for the queen. She finds out that the king is up and alert. And this is a surprise because rumors have been swirling that the king was on his deathbed. But he's eating dinner, things have been going great, until he asks to see his child who passed away. He had completely forgotten that she died, and he starts to blame the queen for this. Losing his cool, freaking out. It's a really, really sad state. The next day, though, the Duke sobers up, meets up with Daphne, Violet, and Danbury at the castle where they are to plead their case in front of the queen. And it's worth noting that the queen she had no hand whatsoever in denying their marriage request. But she still tells them to go ahead, plead their case. Daphne's the first one to speak, saying that while she's flattered by Friedrich, it was love at first sight, but the Duke jumps in saying it was not love at first sight. It takes everybody a little bit by surprise because no one knows exactly what he's doing, but he tells the queen that there was attraction, sure, but at first, Daphne thought he was arrogant and insincere, and he thought of her as immature. It seemed like romance was entirely out of the question. But the more they spent time together, the more they became friends. This was all happening while they were fooling everybody into thinking that they were courting, when in reality, they just couldn't stand not spending time together. He's never been one to chit-chat, but with Daphne, conversation was easy. And it wasn't until the prince came around when he realized that he didn't want Daphne just to be a friend. He wanted her to be his wife. It's a beautiful speech. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not really an emotional guy, but it even got me. It definitely got Daphne, and it even gets the queen because she reverses course and allows them to marry. And in front of a very small ceremony that includes Daphne's family, Lady Danbury, Will, the Duke, and Daphne become man and wife. Afterwards, they have the reception where Cressida walks up to Daphne and refers to them as friends, telling her she hopes that she'll remember her kindness in keeping secrets. Also at the reception are the Featheringtons, and Marina still wants to marry Colin. Portia, on the other hand, wants her to marry that old guy, but Marina has come up with a plan. She tells Portia, give me a couple days to court Colin and get a marriage proposal. And when Portia points out that even if he does propose, it's going to take months for them to marry. By that time, this kid comes out. It's going to be obvious to Colin that it's not his. Marina tells Portia, well, we don't have to wait for marriage because that little vixen is planning on seducing Colin, getting in his pants early. It'll kill two birds with one stone. It'll force Colin to marry her, and he will believe it's his child. This is really upsetting to Penelope. Nobody seems to listen to her that Marina and Colin shouldn't be together. It's partly because she's friends with Colin, but partly because she has a giant crush on him. So at the reception, Penelope is pointing out all these guys to Marina that she could end up getting with, but Marina's only concern is where is Colin Bridgerton? And it gets to the point where Penelope says, anybody but Colin. He's my friend, he's a good man, and he shouldn't be tricked into your plot. And Marina gets really upset, saying, well, should I just entrap a bad guy then? Would you find it acceptable if I was to live my life with a guy who didn't treat me as a human being? I mean, what exactly am I supposed to do? I'll be a good wife to Colin. He'll be a good father. The conversation, though, is broken up when Portia comes over and lets Marina know that the old guy is off the table. He's engaged to somebody. And Portia tells Marina, your little plan better work. And at that moment, Marina sees Colin, so she springs into action. She gets Colin alone in the library, noting that they shouldn't be there alone, and she does try to seduce him, but Colin isn't the hit it and quit it type. He actually rejects her advances, saying how difficult it is, but then he does pop the question. Unfortunately for Marina, he wants a big wedding. He wants time to plan. He wants time for their families to get there. It's time that Marina doesn't have. Colin also points out that they shouldn't say anything about the engagement, mainly because it's Daphne's day. They don't want to overshadow it. But outside in the reception, all the heavy hitters in town are there, including the Queen. The Queen overhears Eloise asking Lady Danbury if she's Lady Whistledown, and Danbury says no, but hey, let me know if you find out who she is. And when the Queen overhears Eloise talking about her, the Queen wants to know exactly what evidence Eloise has. So Eloise tells her theory that Lady Whistledown must be a widow. Also at the party is Granville and Benedict. And Granville starts saying, hey, about last night, but Benedict cuts in and says, what do you mean about last night? So Granville's secret is safe with Benedict. Although he is pretty surprised when Granville introduces Benedict to his wife, and his wife is the other woman that Benedict had a threesome with. But we don't lifestyle shame on this YouTube channel. The party, though, is getting to be a lot for Daphne. She runs up to her bedroom to hide, where Violet comes and finds her, and Violet tries to have the conversations about what goes on wedding night. I'm talking about the sex stuff, because Daphne has no idea about anything. And Violet is doing her best to keep it PG, but she's not giving her enough information, so Daphne's in for quite a surprise. She does, however, have to get ready to go, because her and the Duke are headed back to the Duke's place. It's quite a journey, but she says goodbye to her family, including Eloise, who she's never had a great relationship with, but she does love her. She's her sister. But after they get in the carriage to take off, the Duke lets her know that they're going to be spending their wedding night at an inn, because his house is too far away for them to go there in one shot. And it's not exactly what Daphne had planned for her wedding night, but she keeps her mouth shut. When they do arrive at the inn, however, she's upset when she finds out that the Duke had asked for separate rooms. Once again, though, she keeps her mouth shut. But as she's pacing in the room, she finally gets sick of it, holding it all in. She opens the door to go talk to the Duke, but the Duke is actually standing there wanting to know if she wants to go get dinner. And that's when all of her raw emotion lets out. She yells at him that she doesn't want to get dinner because she spent the last 3 days trying to talk to him. And she understands that he doesn't want to be with her. He'd rather be in his separate room, enjoy a wordless dinner. But this whole thing is a complete misunderstanding between the two. And after they talk it out, the Duke isn't mad at her at all. He just feels really guilty about the fact that he's keeping her from her dream, having a family. The Duke tells Daphne, everything I told the Queen was true. I can't stop thinking about you. I am yours, Daphne. But Daphne isn't really getting the message, and that frustrates the Duke, And Daphne thinks that he's angry, but he says, no, I'm not angry. This is what happens when somebody burns for someone. And he thinks that Daphne doesn't burn for him, but it turns out that Daphne does, in fact, burn for him. The two then start to kiss. The Duke starts peeling off her clothing. He eventually takes his pants off and shows her his lap snake, and the two consummate the thing. And it seems like she's having a good time, and it's worth noting that the Duke's pullout game is a 10 out of 10. In episode 6, with Daphne gone away with the Duke, Colin feels like this will be a good time to alert everybody to his engagement to Marina. So he makes that announcement at a party, which takes everybody by surprise, including his family. Anthony walks up to Violet and says, "Do you have any idea about this?" But she knows people are watching, so she doesn't want to act appalled. But the Bridgertons aren't the only ones who are a little bit perturbed by this, because Penelope is definitely pissed off. And when Anthony gets Colin alone, he rips into him, saying, "You barely know this girl." Anthony asks him, "Did you do anything with her? I mean, is there a reason behind this?" But Colin says, "No, I'm doing this for love." Anthony blames himself, saying, "I should have taken you to brothels when you got back to school. This is what happens when you don't sow your wild oats," aka slutted up around town. He feels like Colin is just marrying the first chick who will sleep with him. And Colin feels like he's hearing way too much from a guy who's scared to marry. The next day when Colin gets up, he is greeted at breakfast by a very awkward interaction with his family. The only one who's excited for him is Hyacinth, and that's only because the engagement has made the latest pamphlet from Whistledown. Colin knows he needs to talk to his mother alone to find out her true feelings about this, and it doesn't seem like Violet is very pleased. He tells her, I've been courting Marina all season. Maybe you didn't notice because you were so busy with Daphne." Violet says she noticed him flirting with Marina, but he flirts with a lot of girls. And since she doesn't want to rain on his parade, she just says that everything's happening so fast and she wasn't prepared to have 2 children fly the nest in 1 season. So Violet is taking the PC approach. Penelope is not. When she walks in and sees Marina, she is rude as hell to her, trying to give her the silent treatment. Even as Marina explains to Penelope how important it is for her to have Penelope on her side because she was the first really nice person she met, Penelope just feels like she's kissing her ass. She does tell Marina, "I'm never going to bring scandal on this family or your name, but you need to know I don't approve of this relationship." Marina, though, needs to head off to the modiste to get a wedding dress, and at the modiste, she runs into Lady Bridgerton and Eloise. Violet tells Marina, "Do not call me Lady Bridgerton. You must call me Violet now. Our families are to be entwined." Portia invites Violet over to dinner the next night so they can celebrate, and then she goes to have a conversation with the modiste about the bill that they have. The outstanding balance is so much that the Featheringtons aren't allowed to actually buy new dresses for their daughters. And since Lord Featherington has no money, this becomes an issue. Portia thought that the modiste would let it slide because of the fact that Marina is getting married, and not only is she getting married, she's getting married to a Bridgerton. But the seamstress isn't willing to let that slide. And as she's telling Portia, maybe you need to find another seamstress in that thick French accent, Marina calls her out on it because Marina's mother is from France. And she starts speaking to the modiste in French, telling her how she's not fooled by her little act. She doesn't believe the modiste is French. This really shouldn't be a big deal because the modiste does good work, everybody goes to her, but when you're selling French fashion and you're not actually French, it becomes an issue. And to keep Marina's mouth shut, the modiste agrees to make the dress. The next day, all of the Featheringtons are heading over to the Bridgerton household for dinner to celebrate, and Portia tells Marina that she will bring up the matter of having a quick wedding. But Penelope is done hiding behind the mask of politeness, and she's flat out telling people, yeah, this isn't going to work. Lady Bridgerton is smart, she's had 8 kids, she's going to know when she's being played. But the Featheringtons don't really have another option, so they go along with it. During the dinner, Portia does bring up that she thinks that they should marry sooner rather than later, but Anthony says no, Colin's way too young. I think a lengthier engagement would be more appropriate. And after dinner, as one of the Featheringtons is punishing the group with her horrible singing, Penelope gets Colin alone and tells him that Marina is still in love with somebody else, a guy named George. She's seen the love letters and she's still in love with him. But Colin is unfazed by this, mentioning how he's flirted and had crushes with just about every girl in town. And if Marina is so in love with George, then why is she marrying me? Marina, though, comes out and sees the interaction going down and tells Penelope that Portia wants to have a word with her. She then gets Colin's undivided attention and says how she can't take this anymore. Her own family doesn't want her, the Featheringtons don't want her, and it's obvious that Violet disapproves of the relationship. Colin cuts her off and says, "That's not true. I'm your family now." And Marina tells him, "That's all I want. I just wish that we could be married right this second." And that's when Colin brings up the one way that they can get married, heading over to Scotland. He knows that Anthony will be pissed off when they arrive back, but at that point it's too late. They're married. Marina tells him she loves the idea, and Colin says, "Okay, give me a day to arrange everything." So these two lovebirds are doing the 1800s version of flying off to Vegas and getting married in front of Elvis. But Penelope is not done giving up hope that she can break this relationship up. She goes through Marina's things and finds the love letters and notices that there's something up with them. Mainly that the signature from George does not match up. And when Marina walks in the room, initially she's pissed off that Penelope is holding her things, but Penelope excitedly says, "No, you don't understand. George didn't write these letters. My mother did. George never said those horrible things to you." And Penelope is convinced that this will change Marina's mind, but it doesn't. Because Marina says, "Well, it doesn't matter anyway. He still hasn't written back to me. He's abandoned me." And Penelope is getting more and more upset about this, and she asks Marina, "What are you going to do when Colin discovers that the child is not his? He's not an idiot." And Marina tells her that she'll live safe in the knowledge that her husband is a good and kind man, expecting Colin just to accept the child as his own. But Marina also realizes that Penelope is way too invested in this and tells her, "You love Colin Bridgerton." That's the only reason why all of this makes sense. And Penelope tries to play it off like that's not the case, but Marina gives her a cold dose of reality that Colin will always view Penelope as a sister, whereas he will view Marina as a wife, and it will never change. And with nowhere else to turn, Penelope that night heads back to her old friend Eloise's arms. Even though they were fighting, they're still really good friends deep down, and Eloise tries to comfort Penelope as she's bawling her eyes out, knowing that Colin is making this big mistake getting tricked. But before Colin and Marina can head off to Scotland to get married, Lady Whistledown has gotten word that Marina is tricking him, and she writes about it in the latest pamphlet, which puts a kibosh on the whole thing. It makes the Featheringtons look really, really bad. Now, over with Daphne and the Duke, they arrive at the Duke's place, a place called Cliveden, a massive mansion, and they're greeted by the staff that includes sort of the house manager, a woman named Mrs. Coulson. And they quickly christen the bedroom, but one of the staffers walks in after they finish, of course, he's not rude, and tells the Duke that while he knows he's on his honeymoon, the affairs are a mess. There's also a ton of letters from farmers begging for an audience with the Duke. The Duke hasn't been there in a while, and in his absence, things are all a mess. So while the Duke is attending to, I guess, his job, Daphne is walking around the castle with Mrs. Coulson, and she's kind of being a know-it-all with things, pointing things out that she wants to change. You can tell that it's irking Mrs. Coulson, but she's polite enough not to say anything. But they are on their honeymoon, so they bang all over the place. I mean, outside, inside, table, bed, doesn't matter. And it's so adorable because as Daphne is talking to her lady's maid, she tells her that she didn't even know it was possible for the Duke to have sex because of the fact that he said he couldn't have children. And it's so laughable because the Duke's thrust game is at a 100. They do take a break from having sex, though, and attend a local festival where Daphne is instructed to pick a winner out of 3 pigs. She asks one of the guys there, what exactly does the winner get? And the guy tells her that the pig gets slaughtered. And that's all she's told. So she doesn't want the innocent pig to get slaughtered. And she tells the crowd that it's a tie. All 3 pigs win. And people are definitely looking at her pretty cross-eyed as they give her a nice polite golf clap. Daphne and the Duke, though, then start walking around the crowd where a farmer does approach the Duke about the fact that the rent for farmers has been tripled. It's something that the Duke and, of course, Daphne had no idea about. And they assure him that they will look into it. A little girl then runs up to Daphne crying, and Daphne comforts her. And when the little girl's mother shows up to find that the Duchess is comforting her daughter, she's a little embarrassed. But Daphne is extremely kind to this woman. It gives the Duke, though, a glimpse as to what Daphne would have been like as a mother. And as they're walking back to the castle, they have a conversation about it. And the Duke does admit that Daphne is a natural with children. The next day when she wakes up, she heads to the Duke's office, but the Duke is up to his eyeballs in work. He didn't realize just how much of a mess everything truly was. So he's busy for the day. And Daphne has decided to go around town handing out gift baskets. She heads out to the garden with her lady's maid to start picking flowers when Mrs. Coulson catches her and is mortified that the Duchess is picking her own flowers, assuring her that if she just tells her what she needs, she'll get it for her. But Daphne looks at it like it's not that big of a deal. I'm just picking flowers. We don't need to get other people involved. I'm not that much of a diva. And at this point, it's become obvious to even Daphne that Mrs. Coulson doesn't really like her. She then takes those gift baskets, though, and with her lady's maid, she heads to the town, but nobody is accepting her gifts. She can't figure out why, because because she was told that this was tradition. The little girl from the festival runs up to Daphne once again with her mother in tow. Her mother is very pregnant. And Daphne gives the little girl a hug, but then offers her mother a gift basket. And the woman says that she would accept it, but she doesn't have the arms to take it home with her, so Daphne says, oh, don't worry, we'll walk with you. Daphne then asks the woman, why is it that people are being pretty rude to her? She wants to know if she did something wrong. And the woman lets her know that at the festival, it's tradition for the farmer with the winning pig to get the contract to feed the entire village for the year. When Daphne decided that all three were a tie, nobody was awarded the contract, thus nobody was awarded the money, and it was looked at as a slight. Of course, Daphne had no idea about this, and the woman tells her, well, how could you? Nobody told you. So Daphne is determined to make this right. She also wants to mend the fence with Mrs. Coulson. She feels like they got off to a rocky relationship, and with the Duke so preoccupied with his work, when she gets back to the castle, she asks to speak with her. After telling Mrs. Coulson how much she appreciates the help, they get into a conversation about the Duke and his childhood, and how the Duke doesn't really seem at ease in Cliveden. And Mrs. Coulson is very aware of this, mentioning how his childhood wasn't the easiest upbringing. And it all had to do with the Duke's father. We know the backstory of that, but Mrs. Coulson mentions how she hated the fact that the Duke's mother was always blamed for this. She tells Daphne that she told the Duchess that a womb cannot quicken without a strong, healthy seed. Unfortunately for Daphne, she doesn't really know what the hell she's talking about. It does, however, give Daphne insight into her husband. Although later that night, when she goes to visit her husband and they have sex, and the Duke pulls out, she starts kind of putting the pieces together. But she confirms this when she heads down and talks to her lady's maid and point blank asks her how her baby's made, because she knows nothing. So the woman explains it to her. And that's when Daphne realizes that it's not that the Duke can't have children, he won't have children, and that is why he's pulling out. And this revelation really upsets Daphne. It's just sitting with her. So the next time they have sex, normally the Duke is on top. That position is referred to as missionary. But in a bold move, very early on in the relationship, Daphne spices it up. She flips the Duke over, with Daphne now on top, and that position is called cowgirl. This puts the Duke in a tough spot, because now if he wants to pull out, he literally has to chuck his wife off of him. And he doesn't do that. Daphne stands her ground. And for the first time in his life, the Duke does not pull out. I guess the first time that we know of. And Daphne makes it painfully obvious that this was all an orchestrated plan by her, by simply getting up and starting to walk out. And the Duke tries to talk to her about what just happened. And that's when she confronts the Duke about the fact that, not that he can't have kids, he's choosing not to. And in Daphne's mind, that is completely different from what she was told. She feels like the Duke lied to her. Can't means you're unable to. Won't, well, that's a different story. And she was okay with the fact that the Duke couldn't have her kids. But now knowing that the Duke won't have her kids is very unsettling to her. The Duke, however, feels like he didn't lie to her, telling her that he was prepared to die on a dueling field than take her dream away from her. And it was her who insisted on this marriage. Daphne at one point used the word betrayal. The Duke at one point used the word love. And that sets Daphne off, who says, you don't trick the one you love. You don't lie to the one you love. So there's trouble in paradise. In episode 7, it's obvious that the Duke and Daphne have not made up. Their relationship is extremely awkward and contentious. It's gotten to the point where Daphne has actually asked for her items to be removed from the Duke's bedroom, which the Duke is completely against. But their minor squabbling and bickering is interrupted when Daphne gets the latest issue of Whistledown and reads that her brother is entangled in a scandal. So she immediately jumps up and says, I have to head back to my family. And the Duke wants to go with her, but Daphne isn't a fan of that idea. But the Duke says a separate bedroom is one thing, a separate marriage, that cannot be. So the Daphne and Duke head off to the Bridgerton house. And in the latest issue of Whistledown, she mentions how this scandal doesn't just ruin the Featherington name, it also ruins anyone attached to it, which means it also ruins the Bridgerton reputation. And the best way that Violet can deal with this situation is just to smile and act like nothing's wrong. The problem is no one in town is buying this. They're looking at the Featheringtons a little cross-eyed, and they're also looking at the Bridgertons a little weird because they know that Colin got duped. And while at the Modiste, Eloise suggests that maybe they hold off on putting her into society. 1 to 2 years, because truthfully, she has no interest in ever being put out there in the first place. But Violet really doesn't pay that suggestion any mind. Eloise points out that if you look at the Featherington daughters, they did nothing wrong, yet they're being punished. And all of this is because of the Whistledown pamphlet. The Modiste even chimes in saying that she wouldn't want to cross Whistledown because her word is good as gospel. And that's when Eloise realizes that if Whistledown can ruin a reputation, maybe she can also restore one. So Eloise is now hell-bent more than ever on finding out the identity of Lady Whistledown. But the pamphlet really did a number on the Featheringtons, but also Marina more than anybody. So much so that when Portia takes her to a charity where she can have the baby, the charity actually shuns her, telling Portia that the only way they'll accept her is if Portia makes a sizable donation. So this proves what the Modiste said correct. That night, Daphne and the Duke arrive in town, with the Duke dropping Daphne off and the Duke heading to Hastings. And when Daphne walks in, the entire family is surprised to see her, but she tells them that once she read what happened in Whistledown, she came right away. Antony acts like he doesn't need her, but she points out, no, you actually do. The way that Daphne sees it, with her and the Duke arriving back in town, they can go to a party or two, and that's all that everyone will be talking about, including Whistledown. It'll help this scandal involving Colin go by the wayside. But Colin's still pretty upset, and Daphne can tell, and she goes to talk to him, where Colin tells her, I really did want to marry her. But Daphne says Marina was a stranger to him. Whistledown knew her better than he did. And Colin fires back that Lady Whistledown knows everybody's secrets. And that's when Daphne says you're lucky to learn her secrets now rather than after your wedding night, kind of implying that everything's not great in her marriage. After her meeting with the family, Daphne heads back to Hastings, and she's there by herself because the Duke spent the night boxing with Will, getting out some of his aggression. He eventually comes home, though, and Daphne is still awake, and she asks him, is this what our marriage is going to be now? You gallivanting the streets, doing God knows what, as I just sit here waiting for you to come back. And the Duke takes offense to that comment because he's been faithful to her up until this point. But Daphne feels like she's in the right to make that comment because of the Duke's reputation. The two, though, can't keep their hands off of one another, and they end up kissing, with the Duke going down on Daphne on the steps. But when Daphne suggests maybe they take this thing into the bedroom, that's when the Duke stops, saying, no, we can't do this. We can't ever do this again. So she asks, well, then what is our marriage going to be? And the Duke informs her that if she is to be pregnant, he will take care of the baby. But they are basically married in name only. And this isn't exactly what Daphne signed up for, so she storms off to bed. The next morning, though, she wakes up and she requests the presence of Marina, because Colin wanted to meet up with Marina, but he was told that wasn't the best idea. Because at this point, the Whistledown pamphlet is painting him as a victim. But the Bridgertons feel like if he goes and visits Marina and he is caught, then people are going to assume that he is the father. But Colin wants answers, so Daphne facilitated this meeting where at first Colin doesn't believe that this could possibly be true, but Marina says, no, it is. I am with child. And that's when Colin unloads on her. And she doesn't handle it well, but Colin was truly in love with Marina. And he tells her, the worst part about this is if you had just came to me and been honest, I wouldn't even have thought a second about marrying you. But now, with the lying, kick rocks. Marina then heads home crying, and the Bridgertons need to get ready for a picnic going on that is being held by the Queen. And when they show up, it's just as Daphne had predicted. Everybody is looking at the Duke and the Duchess, and everybody is feeling sympathy for the Bridgerton household. Lady Danbury comes up and welcomes them back into town, and even invites Daphne to a party at her house the following night with a bunch of other married ladies in high society. Even the Queen has interest in the Bridgertons, although it's Eloise. She wants to get the latest on her theories on who Whistledown is, although Eloise hasn't cracked the case, and that kind of annoys the Queen. The Featheringtons do eventually show up, and everybody at the party stops what they're doing and stares them down. It's painfully awkward. Eloise actually grabs Penelope to see how she's doing. But all Penelope can think about is Colin. And Eloise tells her Colin's fine. I mean, he's heartbroken and his pride's hurt, but he'll be fine. The men in this always are. But Whistledown has gone way too far with this. She smeared the name of my best friend. So once we find out who she truly is, we'll convince her to restore your name. Write a retraction. But as Eloise is giving Penelope that little pep talk, Portia went up to Violet to try to act like she was also duped and she's also a victim, although Violet just walks off. And one of the aides to the Queen walks up to Portia and tells her that she has to leave. She's no longer welcome. And it's a pretty sad sight. Even Daphne feels pity for the Featheringtons. And when she hears Cressida make a crass comment, she tells her off. She then walks into the garden by herself, but Violet is right on her heels because Violet can tell that something hasn't been right with Daphne since she's arrived home. And she confronts her about it, and Daphne rips into her, saying that Violet did not prepare her for married life. She just used stupid analogies and set up Daphne to go into the real world like a fool. Daphne basically blames Violet for all of her marital problems. Daphne's dressing down only stops when the two are caught by Danbury. After the party, though, everybody heads home, including the Featheringtons. They obviously headed home a little bit earlier than everybody else. And Portia lays into Lord Featherington, blaming him for what went down at the party. She then gets word, though, that the Duchess has arrived. And Daphne showed up that day to apologize to Marina. After a little bit of time, she's realized that she has no idea what Marina is going through. And she might have done the same thing if she was in Marina's case. She wants to help her out. Marina lets her know about George and the fact that he's a soldier, and that's when Daphne comes up with the idea of getting in touch with the general. Daphne is under the impression that the general and his wife are still in town, so maybe if she could just talk to the general, she can reunite George and Marina. But Marina says, no, there's no point of that. George has made it painfully clear he doesn't want anything to do with me. He's never written me back. But Daphne doesn't accept that, saying, why should he have control over your life? He should have to answer for what he did. So when Daphne finds out that the general's wife is going to be at that party held by Lady Danbury, she sends her RSVP. And when she shows up, it's nothing like any party she's ever been to. It's a bunch of high society women, but they're letting loose. And Daphne is put at a table with Granville's wife, Cressida's mom, Danbury, and the general's wife. And they're playing a card game, and Daphne is dominating the competition. She's taking all of their money. And throughout the night, she eventually gets to the point where she asks the general's wife if she could possibly find a soldier for her. And the general's wife says, well, you're going to have to ask my husband about that, because it turns out the general isn't in town anymore. He's back on the battlefield. And throughout the conversation that night, Daphne is pretty surprised to hear that a lot of the women aren't real fond of their husbands. They'd actually rather be home alone, able to let loose at parties like this. Most of the women are completely content with being married in name only. And they all think that Daphne's surprised by this because she's in that honeymoon phase, when in reality, Daphne's surprised about this because she realizes now she was a rare one who grew up in a house with true love. Now, on the flip side, the Duke that night went to that men's club where he's approached by Antony, because Antony's felt like the Duke has been giving him the cold shoulder ever since the Duke came back into town. And he has. Antony confronts the Duke about what is going on with the Duke and his sister, because it's clear that something hasn't gone right, and he figures that it's got to be the Duke's fault. The conversation slowly gets pretty contentious, though, with Antony telling the Duke that his father never prepared him to lead a household, and the Duke telling Antony that his father would be ashamed right now because Antony hasn't married, kept on the family name. It eventually comes to blows. So when Daphne arrives home from her party that night, she finds the Duke all banged up and she starts tending to his wounds. But shortly that leads to kissing, and she once again wants to take things further, but the Duke doesn't. And when she brings up how happy they would be with a child, the Duke flat out pulls away. So she asks him, why won't you have kids? And that's when the Duke tells her that it all has to do with the vow he made to his father on his deathbed not to keep the family name together. And Daphne cannot believe that all of this is over a promise made to a guy who's no longer alive. She tells the Duke, you made a promise to me too. You made wedding vows. So you'd rather break the promise to me than break the promise to the guy that's no longer on this planet. And the Duke doesn't really dispel that theory, so she alerts him that she's due to have her period in a couple days, so they'll know pretty shortly what promise he's going to break. The next day, a new pamphlet from Whistledown comes out, and it's all about how the Duchess and the Duke haven't really had company since they've been back in town. But Lady Whistledown theorizes that it's because they're still in that honeymoon phase. She doesn't know yet that it's really because they kind of can't stand each other. But Whistledown omitted the party that the Queen held. So when the Queen reads Whistledown's latest pamphlet and not a mention of her party is in there, she gets really offended, and now Whistledown is in her crosshairs. Daphne, however, really couldn't care less. She started her day writing a letter to the general, and then she headed over to the Featheringtons' household to let Marina know what she did. But when Marina finds out that the Duke didn't sign off on it, all of the hope she had is gone by the wayside. Because she feels like there's no way the general is just going to respond to a Duchess without the Duke's consent. She appreciates what Daphne did, but she has no hope. In the other room down the hall, though, Eloise is there talking to Penelope about who Whistledown could be. And the latest theory is she must be a tradesperson. And she's so excited about her new theory and can't wait to tell the Queen that night. But in order to do that, she's going to have to attend a concert, which means she's going to have to be put out in public. And even though she doesn't want to be introduced in society, she cares more about letting the Queen know who Whistledown could be. So that night, Eloise gets all dolled up, and Violet is thrilled, not realizing the true intentions behind this. And all of the Bridgertons head to the concert. Even Colin shows up. He does have an awkward conversation with Granville about what exactly is up with Granville's marriage, and Granville tells him that he's in love with the guy who Colin caught him with, and this allows his wife to really do whatever the hell she wants. Colin, though, can't wrap his head around this, and Granville kind of calls him a hypocrite, saying, you want to be different. You kind of want this free lifestyle, yet maybe that's all it is from you, is talk. And while Colin was getting an earful from Granville, Eloise tried to go up to the Queen to give her theory, but the Queen fires her, saying that she's hired private investigators to find out the true identity of Whistledown. She no longer needs Eloise's services. So at this point, Eloise doesn't want to be there, and Colin really doesn't want to be there either. So they head home in a carriage. But on the way home, Colin says that he's picking up a friend. And that's when they stop at the modistes. And this is a big surprise to Eloise. She had no idea that Colin and the modistes were a thing. Eventually, though, the awkward carriage ride is broken up when the modiste asks Eloise how her night's going. And Eloise tells her that out of all of the people at that party, and there were so many, she didn't have a meaningful conversation with anybody. And the modiste interjects and says, well, everybody but the Featheringtons. And that's when the light bulb goes off for Eloise and she realizes that the modiste is Lady Whistledown. She does, however, keep this theory to herself. Back at the concert, though, Anthony is in one balcony, but he can't keep his eyes off of the crowd because he sees Sienna, although she's there with another guy. And then over with Daphne, unfortunately, she rushes to the bathroom where her Aunt Flo came to town, and she breaks down crying because she truly believed that she was pregnant. But the modiste was correct. The only people not in attendance were the Featheringtons. And Penelope goes to check on Marina that night, but Marina had put a bunch of herbs in some tea and drank it in an attempt to kill her baby. And when Penelope opens the door, she finds Marina unconscious. She calls for Portia's help, but there's not a lot that Portia can do. And Lord Featherington wasn't there because he has a scheme to get back in the black. He sees a poster for Will's next fight and approaches him about throwing it. At first, Will says, my honor isn't for sale. But the more that Featherington pushes, the more that Will truly realizes that he could set his family up for life by taking the sure thing and throwing the fight instead of actually fighting this guy and trying to win. And this definitely has Will thinking. And in the season finale, great news, Marina didn't die, although she's pretty convinced her baby did. She's on the mend and Penelope's looking after her a little bit. And Marina apologizes for everything that went down, saying that Penelope was right. Colin's a good guy. He didn't deserve that. They then hear a horse outside and figure that it might be a suitor, but when they go to the window and Marina looks out of it, she looks like she's seen a ghost. And no, it's not George, but it's George's brother. In order, though, to have a proper one-on-one, they have to wait for Portia, who is out running some errands. Now, over with the Duke and the Duchess, now that Daphne and the Duke know that they're not going to be having a child, they've decided to split up. But they're holding off on the announcement until after the season, which is only in a few days. So in the meantime, they have to get the 1800th century of a portrait mode done, an actual portrait, which is being done by Granville, who's having a tough time because it seems like they can't stand each other as they're standing there. And he expresses this so they look longingly into each other's eyes, and you can tell that there's still an attraction there. And even Granville can see it. And while the Duke and Daphne are getting their portrait painted, the rest of the Bridgerton household is kind of just sitting around hanging out, with Eloise grilling Benedict on how he knows the modiste, what she's into, where she hangs out. He thinks it's all because she's a tradesperson, when in reality it's just because Eloise thinks that she's Whistledown. Violet does walk in the room because she's gotten word that their cousin is showing up later that day, which excites pretty much everybody. Before the cousin shows up, though, Violet goes and meets with Daphne as they walk the market, and that's when Daphne tells Violet that her and the Duke are going their separate ways. Violet thinks it's a huge mistake, saying it can't be that bad. You can probably work this out, but Daphne tells her as soon as he decided he'd rather betray me than the grudge that he made to his dead father, then that was pretty much it. They then get interrupted, though, by Portia, who walks up and starts saying how unfortunate it is because they don't have an invite to the ball that night, and the ball is being held by the Duke and the Duchess. And Violet does not want to help her out at all, but Daphne says, don't worry about it, your daughters will be extended an invitation. Portia's lady maid then walks up to her and tells her that a carriage has arrived at the house with a Mr. Crane in it, and that piques the interest of Daphne, thinking that it's George. So everybody heads to the Featherington household, but they find out that it's not actually George, it's his brother. And he tells the group that there's a reason Marina hasn't heard from George in a while. It's because, unfortunately, George passed away on the battlefield. Marina walks out of the room, and Daphne goes chasing after her, where Marina tells Daphne that George is in the process of actually writing her back. George's brother, Philip, found the letter in his belongings where he was promising Marina that they two could run away together. He was in love with her. And she's very appreciative of Daphne because if it wasn't for Daphne, Philip never would have known that Marina was there. And she never would have known how George truly felt about her. Marina then walks off to be with herself, and Daphne heads back to Hastings, where she runs into the Duke, and the Duke is heading off to Will's boxing match that day, a boxing match he has decided to throw for a fat payday. And the Duke asks Daphne if she's coming with, but she says no because she has to prepare for the ball that night. Right before he walks out, though, Daphne says, "What did your father do to make you take that vow?" But Simon just isn't ready to have that conversation with her, saying it's best if she just doesn't know. Simon then heads off to the boxing match where Will is acting pretty weird. When his wife brings up that they could take this boxing thing around the country, he says, "No, we have to prepare for our future. I can't do this forever." He's also got Lord Featherington walking around the ring staring him down. Lord Featherington walks up to these two guys that are in a gang to place a sizable wager on the guy that Will is fighting. And they know that something's up because the only reason a lord would ever bet with them is if his word just isn't good anywhere else. But Featherington, to make sure that they take the bet, offers up the deed to his house. Now it's on Will to come through. The fight starts going on, and Anthony is in attendance, but he's not focused on the fight because also in attendance is Sienna and her new man. Although they're making eyes at each other and they both kind of go to the bathroom, aka bang one out under the bleachers. So there's still fireworks there. Back in the ring, however, Will is putting on a clinic with this guy. He's beating the crap out of him. It's putting a fear of God into Featherington, but he does end up doing his job, taking a fall, and it's something that even the Duke notices isn't kosher. Featherington doesn't care. He's just elated that he won his bet, although the guys he made the bet with definitely think that something fishy went down. After the fight, the Duke goes into the locker room where Will is and starts to dress him down about taking a dive, mentioning honor and all of that, but Will says, "Hold on, what's more honorable than taking care of one's family?" He figures that all of this coming from the Duke has nothing really to do with the fight. It has more to do with what the Duke is dealing with in his own marriage, so he tells him, "Look, man, you're not mad at me. Take that someplace else," and kicks the Duke out. But while the Duke was at the fight, Daphne was hell-bent on finding out exactly what happened between the Duke and his father. And after snooping around a couple of drawers, she finds the letter that the Duke wrote to his dad when he was a little kid. The same letters that his dad never opened, never read. And as she's reading them, Lady Danbury comes in the room, and they start having a conversation about the relationship between the Duke and his dad and how awful it was. The stuttering problem, the perfectionist that his dad wanted him to be, how Lady Danbury really helped him out in all ways. It's really eye-opening to Daphne, who says that Simon can't be more different than that. This conversation with Danbury really changes Daphne's mood around the Duke. The next morning, the two have breakfast together, which hasn't been a real trend, and she tells the Duke that she's going back to her family home because her cousin's showing up, and she does want him to come with because it might be weird if he doesn't. So after breakfast, they head over and they start conversing with the Bridgerton family. Over in the corner, though, Benedict is yelling at Eloise because Eloise went to go pay the modiste a visit where she didn't come right out and say, "You're Lady Whistledown." She just hinted around it, saying things like, "Well, I really hope Lady Whistledown makes retractions. It would be a shame if Lady Whistledown ruined the name of my friend." But as Benedict is having this conversation with Eloise, Anthony comes over and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And Benedict comes out and says, "I'm having a relationship with the modiste." And he expects Anthony to be completely against it, but Anthony, who has his own thing going on with Sienna, says, "No, I'm happy for you." Penelope even shows up for this party, although when she walks in, Colin's singing and, man, she's swooning. But Eloise pulls her aside and tells her that she's figured out who Whistledown is. It's Madame Delacroix, the modiste. But at this little party, the Duke absolutely shines with the little kids. I mean, he's a natural. After the party, Penelope heads back to the Featherington household where they've had quite a day because Philip came back and actually proposed to Marina, saying that that's what George would have wanted, him to take care of Marina and her child. But Marina said no. She didn't know Philip. She wasn't in love with Philip. She had no interest in marrying Philip. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was convinced that she had terminated the child. So she just headed up to her room. Portia Featherington let Marina be, and she took some of the winnings from Lord Featherington and paid off the debt at the modiste. This allowed the Featherington girls to get brand new dresses. Unfortunately for Penelope, she's still stuck in hideous yellow. As the girls are trying on dresses, they hear a plate outside crash, and that's because Marina was getting some food and she felt something in her stomach, and she immediately knows that she needs to talk to a doctor. They call a doctor in, and the doctor lets her know, yeah, that whole herbal tea trying to terminate a baby thing, shockingly, that didn't work. You're still pregnant. So Marina's going to have to call up Philip again and see if he wants to get married, because she needs some reassurances. Now, most of the town that night is getting ready for the final ball of the season, which is being held by the Duke and the Duchess. And right before the ball, they're admiring their painting, and they start discussing how they want to play this whole thing out, how many dances they want to do together. They don't want to make it too obvious that they're splitting up after this. Even through the conversation, though, you can tell that they still have feelings for each other, and Daphne tells the Duke that he was wonderful with the children. He tells her that children always have adored him, but that doesn't mean he wants any of his own. So the two prepare for one last dance. The ball kicks off, and Antony headed to pick up his date for the night, Sienna. They were hanging out earlier, and they talked about making their relationship public. He was to pick her up that night and take her to the ball as his date. But when he went to pick her up, she was still with that other guy. He's dressed like Tom Cruise in Risky Business, Porky Pig in it, all shirt, no pants. It was awkward. And Sienna tells Antony that all that talk that they had was great, but in reality, she wants to be with somebody who's not going to make her change. And that's this rando with the mustache and great hair. So she breaks things off with Antony. Eloise shows up with Violet all dolled up, but she's extremely uncomfortable. She's still on the hunt, though, for Whistledown. The Featheringtons show up, Benedict and Colin show up, and when Colin sees Penelope, he goes over to talk to her and apologizes to her for everything that happened with Marina, saying that Penelope was right. Penelope, though, can't keep her feelings to herself anymore. She knows she needs to tell Colin how she feels. But right before she does, he says, well, I have something to tell you too. I'm leaving first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to start my tour in the Mediterranean, and you actually helped me remember how much I wanted to travel. This puts a kibosh on Penelope telling Colin how she feels. And she starts to rush out of the ball, but Eloise stops her and tells her, look, the queen's here. I'm going to tell her about Whistledown. But at that point, Penelope doesn't care. She just wants to go home. The poor girl is in a hideous yellow dress, and she's heartbroken. So Eloise walks up to tell the queen her latest theory, but the queen's minion stops her, saying nobody just walks up to the queen. So Eloise starts to smooth talk him a little bit, complimenting him, telling him that it was probably his idea to try to track down Whistledown, which he admits, yeah, it was. And through this conversation, he says that they figured out a printing press that Whistledown gets her pamphlets printed at. And they also know that she drops it off on nights like this, where the entire town is at a ball. So they're actually waiting her out as we speak. And that puts the fear of God into Eloise because she wants to get to Whistledown before the queen does. And she knows at this point she's on borrowed time. So she pays a carriage driver to ride off to the printing press and try to intercept Whistledown. And she does that. Whistledown's carriage shows up, but so do the queen's men. And she yells to Whistledown's carriage that it's a trap. Whistledown is able to get away, and her identity is still a secret. It's all because of Eloise. Back at the ball, however, Danbury walks up to the Duke and says, I'm assuming that your plans to separate from Daphne haven't changed? And he says, no, they haven't. She tells him that pride is going to cost him everything and leave him with nothing. He shouldn't allow it to happen to him like it did to his father. Violet is also trying to do her best to keep the Duke and Duchess together by having a conversation with Daphne about love. And about how the relationship between Violet and her husband wasn't always easy, but they chose to love one another. They didn't just give up. They then have the moment of their last dance, and as they're waltzing around the dance floor, it starts to rain. And everybody gets off except the Duke and the Duchess. At one point, Philippa and her guy try to go back on, but Danbury, being that bad bitch, stops them. Because the Featheringtons aren't going to ruin this moment. Danbury announces to everybody that this party is over. And in the rain, Daphne tells the Duke that she's aware of why the Duke made that vow to his father. And just because somebody isn't perfect doesn't make them any less worthy of love. She tells him, I'm tired of pretending and acting like I don't love you. I love you. I love all of you. Even the parts that you believe are too dark and shameful, I love. You might believe that you're too damaged to ever be happy, but you can choose differently. And then she leaves. They meet back up at Hastings and he tells her, I don't want to be alone, and I know that now. And they agree to stay together. They then have sex where the Duke does not pull out. So that's one happy ending to the night. Unfortunately, over in the Featheringtons, when they get home from the ball, they have terrible news as Lord Featherington has been killed. He went to a brothel that night to celebrate his winnings, but the guys that he screwed over were waiting for him, and they killed him. And they took his money. It's left Portia Featherington not knowing what she's going to do. When Eloise finds out, she heads over to comfort Penelope. They then get into a conversation about what happened between Eloise and Whistledown, and Eloise lets her know that she was able to save Whistledown, and she's pretty positive that next season, Whistledown will right what she did wrong with the Featheringtons. Colin is not the only one that's leaving, though. Marina is also leaving. She was able to get in touch with Philip, and Philip agreed to marry her. She has a conversation with Portia about how she did it, how she was in a relationship so long with someone that she didn't love. And Portia lets her know that it isn't easy, but you learn to love things. You learn to love your children, the house, and she knows that Marina will be good with it because Marina is strong. So Marina gets in a carriage with a guy she barely knows and heads off. And as the Featherington girls are watching the carriage go by, the lady's maid runs up to Portia because they've located the guy that's going to inherit the Featherington estate. And by the looks of it, Portia doesn't seem thrilled. Over at the Bridgertons, they say goodbye to Colin, and the Duke, Duchess, and Antony are having a conversation where the Duke tells Antony that they've decided to stay in London for a little bit. Antony has also made a pretty big decision in his life to find a Viscountess. Antony is on the market. He's looking for a wife. He doesn't even care about love at this point. He's given up on that. And at this point, Eloise has made it back to the Bridgerton household because it's right across the street. And she's talking to Benedict about the Modiste. And it turns out the Modiste is heading back to France. And Eloise says, "Are you going to say goodbye to her?" And Benedict says, "Well, I did last night. I was with her." And that means the Modiste is not Lady Whistledown. Now, fast forward a couple months later. Surprise! It's a boy! Daphne and the Duke welcome their first child into the world together. They don't have names picked out, but they know that it will be an A because that is the Bridgerton tradition. Oh, and then finally, we do find out who Whistledown is. It was Penelope the whole time. Thank you so much for watching this recap. I really appreciate it. I actually like this show a lot more than I thought I would. I thought I was going to hate watch it, but no, I was all into it. Look, give me a thumbs up if you like the video, thumbs down if you don't. Please be nice in the comment section. You don't have to nitpick every little detail I got wrong. It's going to happen. This recap's like 15 hours long. But make sure to share it if you know somebody that needs a Bridgerton recap. Consider subscribing to the channel, and thank you once again for watching.